Saying goodbye to Brenda should have been the hardest part. It wasn't. It was everything that came after. Everything that nearly destroyed me and my family. The church was too quiet that morning. The scent of lilies on her casket, a cruel reminder of the life we'd built together for 37 years. I barely heard Pastor Graham's words. My mind was a million miles away, lost in the echoes of her laughter, the memory of her humming in the kitchen, the sight of her tending her garden. And then I saw him, Dennis, my son. He walked in late, his suit crisp, his expression cold. He didn't look at his mother's casket. He looked at me, a calculating glint in his eyes, then settled in the back row, scrolling on his phone as if he had somewhere better to be. No hug, no comforting hand on my shoulder, just that distant, impatient stare. A heavy knot formed in my chest. Disappointment, anger, a profound sense of loss that went beyond Brenda. After the service, as the well-wishers offered their condolences, Dennis finally approached. Not to comfort me, but to declare, flatly, we need to talk about the will, the farm, the estate. We need to figure out what happens now. My wife had just been laid to rest, and all he cared about was money. I wanted to lash out, to tell him how disgusted I was, but I was too numb, too broken. Not today, Dennis, I managed, my voice barely a whisper. He frowned, sighed, then turned and walked away without another word, leaving me to realize that I had lost more than just my wife. I had lost my family, too. The farmhouse felt hollow without Brenda. Every corner, every object, a painful memory. I found myself staring out the living room window at the old garden shed, sitting at the edge of our property, weathered and silent. For 37 years, Brenda had kept it locked, always insisting it held nothing but old tools. But I remembered the day she made me promise. Years ago, not long after we married, she took my hand, her eyes wide with an unspoken fear. Paul, she'd pleaded, promise me you will never go into that shed, no matter what happens. Promise me. I didn't understand her desperation, but I saw the fear, and I promised. I kept that promise for 37 years, never questioning, never trying the door. I trusted her, but now she was gone, and I was utterly alone. 3 days after the funeral, I finally forced myself to go through Brenda's belongings. The scent of lavender and vanilla in our bedroom was almost unbearable. In her jewelry box, beneath the rings and necklaces, I found it. A small, brass key. Old, heavy, cold in my hand. Attached to it was a folded piece of paper. Her familiar handwriting. 2 words. Forgive me. Forgive her? For what? My gaze drifted to the window, to the small shed, still locked. For 37 years, I had walked past it every day, bound by a promise. Now, with the key in my hand, I felt an irresistible pull. I had to know. I had to know what she had been hiding. I walked across the yard, each step heavier than the last, my heart pounding. The shed door creaked open, revealing not dust and tools, but a small, meticulously organized workspace. And there, on a workbench, was a framed photograph of a young woman, her face strikingly familiar. Beside it, a worn journal. My hands trembled as I opened it. Brenda's elegant script filled the pages, recounting a story I never knew. A story of a secret child, given up for adoption before we met. A son she named Brian. She'd kept in touch with him, watched him grow from afar, and in her final years, she'd even helped him get a job on our very own farm, under the guise of a new farmhand. Brian, the young man I'd hired just months ago. My son. My world tilted. Betrayal, anger, confusion swirled within me. Why the secret? Why the lie? I confronted Brian that evening. He stood before me, his eyes wide with surprise. Then slowly, understanding. She told me not to tell you, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. She said you'd never forgive her. My heart ached for him, for Brenda, for the years lost. I embraced him, a silent promise of a future we could build together. But the joy was short-lived. Dennis, my other son, the one who'd only cared about the will, saw Brian as a threat. He began to spread rumors, to undermine Brian's work, to poison the town against him. He saw Brian not as a brother, but as an interloper, a rival for his inheritance. The sabotage began subtly. Tools went missing, equipment malfunctioned. Then, one morning, Brian found the plow wires cut, cleanly, precisely. He swore he hadn't done it. I believed him. That night, I checked the security cameras, and there he was, Dennis, my own son, deliberately cutting the wires, framing his brother. I confronted him in his law office. He just smiled, cold and unrepentant. "You don't have proof," he sneered. "And even if you did, who would believe you? I'm your son, a lawyer. You're defending a stranger with a record." He was right, and I knew then that he would stop at nothing. A week later, the unthinkable happened. Brian was checking a leak on the grain silo roof. I was in the kitchen pouring coffee when I heard a sickening crash. I ran outside to find Brian on the ground. The old wooden ladder snapped beside him, one rung broken. He was unconscious, his face twisted in pain. My hands shook as I dialed 911, my voice breaking as I told them my son had fallen. He was rushed to the hospital, his leg shattered, his future as a farmer, as my son, hanging by a thread. The police investigated, ruling it an accident. But I knew Dennis was behind it. He had tampered with the ladder, knowing Brian would use it. My own son had tried to kill his brother. The next few months were a blur of hospital visits, physical therapy, and a deepening chasm of grief and rage. Brian recovered slowly, his spirit bruised but not broken. Dennis, meanwhile, continued his campaign of terror, threatening to expose Brian's past, to ruin his reputation. I felt helpless, trapped between two sons, one I had just found, the other I was losing. The farm, once a symbol of our family, became a battlefield. One evening, as I sat alone in the quiet farmhouse, I looked at the old photo of Brenda in the shed. "Forgive me," her note had said. I realized then that she hadn't just been asking for forgiveness for her secret, but for the chaos it had unleashed. She had given me a second chance at fatherhood, a chance to build a new family. I couldn't let Dennis destroy it. I decided to fight back, not with anger, but with truth. I compiled all the evidence, the security footage of Dennis cutting the wires, the police report from Brian's accident, and Brenda's journal, detailing her secret and her love for Brian. I called a family meeting, inviting Dennis, Brian, and even Emily, Brian's girlfriend, who had become a pillar of strength through all this. The air in the living room was thick with tension. I laid out the truth, piece by agonizing piece. Dennis's face paled as I played the video, his carefully constructed facade crumbling. Brian listened, his eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and understanding. When I finished, a heavy silence fell. Dennis finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. I just wanted what was mine." Emily, usually so gentle, looked at him with a fierce resolve. "What's yours, Dennis," she said, "is a family that loves you, if you'd only let them." Brian, despite everything, looked at his brother with a flicker of compassion. "It's not too late," he said, his voice soft. "We can still be a family." It wasn't an overnight transformation. Dennis was angry, ashamed, and deeply hurt. But something in Brian's unwavering kindness, in Emily's quiet strength, began to chip away at his defenses. He started coming to the farm, not to argue, but to watch Brian work, to observe the quiet rhythm of their lives. Slowly, tentatively, he began to help. First, small tasks, then more significant ones. He started talking to Brian, really talking, about their shared mother, about their lives. The bitterness began to dissolve, replaced by a fragile, nascent bond. 2 years later, the farm was thriving. Brian, fully recovered, was an indispensable partner. Emily had become a beloved part of our lives, and Dennis, though still a lawyer, spent most weekends at the farm, his laughter now echoing through the fields, a welcome sound. He had found a new kind of inheritance, one not measured in dollars, but in love and belonging. One cool November evening, as the last rays of sun painted the sky, we gathered at the garden shed. Its white paint gleamed, its door standing unlocked, a symbol of the healing we'd found. Inside, Brenda's workspace was much as it had been, but now, photos of Brian, Dennis, and all of us together lined the walls. I stood before Brenda's original photo, my sons flanking me. "Brenda," I said softly, my voice thick with emotion, "you left a secret in this shed, a secret that nearly destroyed us. But it also gave me something priceless. 2 sons who learned to love each other. A family that learned forgiveness. Tears streamed down their faces as Brian placed a hand on Dennis's shoulder, a gesture of brotherhood, of acceptance. We're not perfect, I continued, speaking to all of them now. We're scarred, inside and out. We've made mistakes. We've hurt each other. But we're a family, a real one, and that's everything. We stood there, 3 generations of pain, love, and redemption, contained in that small space. Then, together, we walked back toward the house, where Emily waited with coffee and pie, the sounds of home drifting through the windows. As I looked up at the darkening sky, at the stars beginning to appear, I hoped Brenda was watching. I hoped she could see what her secret had ultimately created. Not division, but unity. Not destruction, but healing. I hoped she knew that Brian had found his home, that Dennis had found redemption, that I had found peace. I hoped she was proud. Behind us, the garden shed stood quiet in the twilight, its door wide open. No more locks, no more hidden truths, no more secrets dividing us. Just a family, finally whole. To you listening to this story, remember this: God doesn't make mistakes, even when we can't see His plan. When I discovered Brenda's secret, I felt betrayed, but now I see God's hand in everything, bringing Brian when I was drowning in loneliness, teaching Dennis about forgiveness, showing me that family is defined by love, not blood. The Lord gives us second chances. Dennis got his. Brian got the family he'd prayed for. I got 2 sons when I thought I'd lost everything. God turned Brenda's secret, something that could have destroyed us, into a blessing I never expected. If I could advise my past self, that day I opened the garden shed, I'd say, don't let anger consume you. Don't push people away out of fear. Don't handle everything alone. I wasted months being furious at Brenda, instead of thanking God for bringing Brian to me. Don't be like me. Don't let pride steal the blessings right in front of you. This family story taught me that healing takes time. Every family story has scars and secrets, but those struggles make you stronger. Our family story could have ended in tragedy. Instead, it ended in grace. Some might say Dennis was unforgivable, that a dad's revenge would have been justified. But real dad's revenge isn't about punishing, it's about redeeming. The best dad's revenge I took was refusing to give up on either son. That's what fathers do. Here's my truth. Family is messy. Forgiveness is hard, but both are worth fighting for. If you're struggling with family secrets or pain you can't forgive, there's hope. It won't be easy or quick. But if an old Iowa farmer can rebuild a broken family, so can you. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment sharing your thoughts. Have you forgiven the unforgivable? How did you find your way back to family? Share your story. It might help someone struggling. Subscribe and hit the notification bell for our next story. Thank you for staying until the very end.